liability for you. We have some changes to some condo rules. So Freddie and Fannie announced some new temporary project community requirements for loans on condos. If you're buying financing, changes may slow some of the transactions down, of course, if you're trying to do condo sales. And this all came about as a result of that Surfside building collapse in June of 2021, which was absolutely tragic. It happened down there in Miami. For those of you who are not familiar with that, the main contributing factor under investigation is a long-term degradation of reinforced concrete structural support in the ground level parking garage under the housing units. It was due to water penetration and corrosion of the reinforcing steel. They have a lot of that back east. There's a lot of humidity and a lot of water. The problems had been reported in 2018 and noted as much worse in April of 2021. A $15 million program of remedial works had been approved before the collapse, although no main structural work had been undertaken. So that's what's causing these new requirements under the condo rules. So the requirement, part of it is, of course, for safety. The requirements are intended to guarantee the safety of projects and buildings and avoid unforeseen assessments. Freddie Mac will require lenders to provide documentation to demonstrate that projects are not in critical need of repairs and do not require special assessments. These temporary requirements apply to all projects with 5 or more units. 5 or more. Documentation may include, but not limited to, HOA or cooperative board meeting minutes, engineer reports, reserve studies, list of necessary repairs provided by the HOA or the cooperative corporation or management company, and other substantially similar documentation. Again, making sure that these things are safe and that there's not going to be a special assessment needed next week because of some major safety issue. This happened as of February 28th. Critical repairs do not include routine maintenance repairs, damage or deferred maintenance to one or few units in the project, provided there is no impact to the overall safety or soundness or structural integrity or habitability of the improvements. Money for special assessments, the seller must determine the reason for the special assessment, the total amount assessed. For current special assessments, the total amount is an appropriate allocation, or for planned special assessments, there's an adequate cash flow to fund the reason for the special assessment. And for current special assessments, the amount budgeted to be collected year to date has been collected. So they're going to be asking sellers to provide some additional information to the lender if the lender is going to make the loan on the condo. And this is some of the information they're going to want to see. Freddie did not change their reserve requirements for, for their reserve requirements for projects. They currently require 10% reserve or fully funded reserve based on the recent reserve studies. Combined, Freddie and Fannie financed nearly half of all of the all the mortgages. Lenders can originate loans and have a short window within which to provide the documents and then sell the loan to Freddie Mac. So if they don't have the information when they close it, they can gather the information very quickly afterwards, and they will still have an opportunity to sell the loan. Not all projects or borrowers are eligible, of course, as we know, for FHA financing. We know that. For realtors, this means that your seller clients or you may be asked for this information, and even though it is the lender's responsibility, they're going to be asking you and the seller to try to get this information for them. And requesting the documentation from the HOA or management company early may help to speed up the transaction. So early on, finding out exactly what the lender is going to need, so you can start gathering that documentation, because it's not always easy to get. And along those lines, I just want to mention quickly, our title companies in the state are just awesome about ordering our documents for HOAs. It's always important to remember, you guys, that the title companies are not mentioned anywhere in the HOA Act. Nowhere. Guess who is mentioned? The seller is mentioned, the listing broker is mentioned for purposes of gathering that information. So when you've got your title company doing it for you, that's wonderful and it's terrific, and they're doing a terrific job. But you have to remember, at the end of the day, it's not their job. So in the event that it doesn't get provided, your title company doesn't provide that information, that's going to fall back on the seller, and it's going to fall back on you as the listing broker. So even though they're doing it, you need to be following up and making sure that they've ordered it, and making sure that it gets done, and making sure that those disclosures are getting over to the buyer, because at the end of the day, that you and the listing broker and the seller are the ones who are responsible for that. The other thing I'll mention that came up, that I'm going to take to the Forms Committee for a conversation, that came up the other day on the hotline, that you guys may or may not know about because you're not ordering these documents. The title companies are doing so, but some of the condos and HOAs, mostly condos, I think, but they're offering, the association or the management companies are offering a product, I should say, because there is a fee associated with it, where they will go in and they will assess the unit or even the home sometimes to determine if there's any violations, if the seller is in violation of anything. And they will basically sign off and say that everything looks good and that there are no violations. And that's tremendously beneficial for a buyer who's purchasing and then getting in there after the fact and finding out that there's some issue that perhaps the seller had been notified about, or maybe they hadn't been notified. Hopefully they hadn't, because if they had been, hopefully they disclosed that. But if they hadn't been notified about it, there was a violation. And of course, the buyer is going to be the one responsible for fixing that at the point that they move in. So there is this option to purchase this additional kind of coverage, so to speak, or this inspection that would assure the buyer that there are no violations. But because, again, the title companies are ordering these and not the brokers, often you're not aware that that's even available. So from a buyer's broker perspective, you may want to be asking either the seller, the listing broker, or the title company, are they offering this service? Do they allow for an additional fee for me to confirm that there are no violations, and have that inspection done and present that to your buyer as an option. Like I said, I think it's slipping through the cracks. I got a call the other day, or an email the other day, from a broker, and the title company had signed off on a waiver of that inspection on behalf of the buyer, which I'm sure the title company had no authority to do. So the buyer wasn't even presented with the option. Instead, the title company waived the option for the buyer. And then the broker found out about it. The buyer's broker found out about it after the fact and said, my gosh, this would have been something really cool for the buyer to have done. And they should have been given an option. Is it okay that the title company did this? And in my opinion, though I'm not their attorney, I'd say, no, it wasn't okay that they did that, especially since they never even had the conversation with the buyer and just signed off on the waiver without having that conversation. But the reason that's happening is because the title company is being charged with, getting these documents together for the seller and providing them to the buyer. And there's no communication between the buyer and the seller, or even the brokers, on these HOA issues. So be aware that that may exist. And you might want to follow up on that if you're working with a buyer, because it may be a good thing to get. We updated some forums. They've been out since last October, but this is the YouTube channel. If you didn't get to see what those look like, I encourage you guys to go there. That's the end of my presentation today. You have questions, call me on the hotline. Don't call me about the appraisal contingency stuff quite yet, because that's still being massaged a little bit. And when that form gets released, I'm going to do an update, a video that you guys can watch. And so if you still have questions after that, feel free to get in touch with me. I just wanted to introduce all of that to you and let you know it's in the works, and that we are working through that right now. Hopefully something will be out in the next week to 2 weeks on that. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you guys so much for hanging in there with me. I know I'm about 10 minutes over. That's not too bad at all. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful weekend.